Good morning to you all. It is really a privilege for me to be here at this summit, not only because it gives us, the Venezuelans, the chance to tell to the world the truth about the political persecution and intolerance to the dissidents in our country, but also because it gives me the opportunity to share with you some of the stories of living and breathing people like you and me, that are now suffering grave violations of their most essential human rights in Venezuela. I have just a few minutes and I have a presentation to be made, so I want to be perfectly clear about this. The right to life, the right to liberty, the right to personal security, the right to be free from arbitrary detention or incarceration, from illegal criminal persecution or conviction, the right to be born free and to be treated as equals in dignity and rights, and even the right to be recognized as a person, not as an instrument of the power for the intimidation of others because of our political beliefs or even our religious beliefs, are being intentionally violated in Venezuela since 1998 by the Venezuelan government officials, the Venezuelan criminal courts, and police and military forces, with the only purpose of maintaining Hugo Chavez in power as long as possible by disarticulating and intimidating any democratic opposition in Venezuela. I have several examples of this here. There are hundreds of criminal investigations right now in course and still pending against people that have expressed their dissent against the Venezuelan government. More than 19,000 oil workers were fired after 2002 national strike in Venezuela, were denied their severance payments, and were included in blacklists, so no other oil company or other related to the government companies inside and outside Venezuela would hire them. Also, people that vote against Chavez, against Hugo Chavez, in any referendum or election is included in lists that are later used to deny their right to work for the government, for example, and even visas or identification documents such as passports and IDs. These are the people from the oil workers. This is a group of lawyers and victims, I am there, that came to the Hague in 2004 to file a complaint at the International Criminal Court against Chavez and some of the people of their government. This woman right here is Mónica Fernandez, who was the director and president of the NGO, human rights NGO, Foro Penal Venezolano. All of the people there, the gente de petróleo, who was the oil workers and the merchant sailors, Mónica Fernandez, and we the lawyers and the victims we represented, are now formally labeled by Hugo Chavez and his government as traitors to the country. Just because we came to the International Criminal Court and to the Inter-American system of human rights to file petitions against Venezuelan officials and against the Venezuelan government, Hugo Chavez himself has requested to the Supreme Court the opening of a criminal investigation against not only us, the lawyers, but also against the victims we represent, the victims of violations of human rights. That was on July 31st, of 2003. There are also a lot of cases that demonstrate the government intolerance, including not only free journalists, lawyers, and activists of human rights, but also dissident officers, military officers, and even former public officials and ministers, such as retired General Francisco Uzón, who was convicted to more than 5 years in prison for alleged offenses to the military forces, just for express to tell to the public on TV his technical opinion about the possible causes of the death of 2 burnt soldiers in a military headquarters in Venezuela. He was a former minister of Chavez, Minister of Financial Affairs. He passed through the opposition files on April 11, 2002, when he saw from the power what was going on in Venezuela, what was really going on in Venezuela. Just because of that, Chavez ordered the criminal investigation against him, and he is now serving in parole, thanks God, right now, 5 years and 6 months in prison. There is also the case of General-in-Chief Raúl Baduel, which is a very special case because this guy was and is compadre of Hugo Chávez Frías, and until recently he was his Minister of Defense. Just after Baduel publicly questioned the legitimacy of the constitutional amendment proposed by Hugo Chávez for February 2009, a criminal investigation for alleged corruption charges was issued against him, and he is now in prison waiting for trial. The other case is that guy over there in the corner of the picture is the case of Otto Gebauer. Otto Gebauer was sentenced and is now in prison to almost 13 years in prison just because he obeyed on April 11, 2002, the order to bring at that moment deposed President Hugo Chávez Frías from Caracas to the island of La Orchila, near Caracas. He refused to give to the military prosecutors false statements about the alleged plans for killing Chávez. The general that gave him the order was convicted only to 3 years in prison just because he complied with the public ministry. Since 2007, at least 500 formally recognized investigations against the student movement in Venezuela have been opened. I have the honor to represent most of them. Most of these criminal investigations are still pending right now. For example, Nixon Moreno, a prominent student leader from Mérida State University, was falsely accused of criminal charges. He applied for asylum at the Vatican Embassy in Venezuela, the representation of the Vatican government state in Venezuela. The asylum was formally granted to Moreno, but the Venezuelan government to this day has refused and has disrespected the international laws of asylum by not giving him safe passage to the Vatican state. He has been forced to flee from the embassy of the Vatican, and now his destiny is yet undefined. The criminal justice system, and I am about to conclude, in Venezuela is continuously used by the government as a tool of intolerance and to persecute people that is identified as political opposition. 3 short examples. The cases of the recently elected mayor of Maracaibo, Manuel Rosales, now facing criminal charges. The recently elected Metropolitan Mayor, Antonio Ledesma, who has been receiving death threats. Death to Ledesma, it says in the picture down below, since he assumed his charge as mayor of Caracas. And the recently elected governor of Miranda, Enrique Capriles, and former mayor of Chacao, Leopoldo Lopez, which is a very popular leader of the opposition in Venezuela, that holds the record of 25 criminal investigations open against them, all pending and all still in course. What are the crimes? They are all very popular opposition leaders in Venezuela. Recently, the second case, the criminal justice in Venezuela had convicted commissioners, police commissioners Henry Vivas, Lázaro Forero, and Ivan Simonovic, along with 7 police officers that were unjustly sentenced by a criminal court without any incriminating evidences against them on April 3rd, 2009, for the alleged death of 2 of the 19 people killed during the riots that took place in Caracas on April 11th, 2002. None of the other 17 deaths have now a process or a formal investigation. These police officers were convicted just because they served under the command of a very prominent opposition leader. Against all logic, against all the provisions of the rule of the law, the only persons that are now convicted for these facts, in which you can see government supporters shooting at the opposition march and shooting at the police forces, are these guys. None of the pro-government, my time is finished, I will conclude. None of these officers from the government has been indicted or convicted for none of the crimes. And the last case, the very case of the very successful businessman Eligio Cedeño, who has spent now 2 years in prison with his trial suspended, with no term, with no period of time fixed to be reopened, just because he was suspected of being supporter of the leaders of the opposition. Not even the Jewish community in Venezuela or the major synagogue in Caracas are respected. Recently, the temple was robbed and severely damaged by alleged common criminals that, however, did not hesitate to paint anti-Semitic messages in those sacred walls. The same messages, by the way, often used by President Chavez himself against the state of Israel, taken, by the way, from late Norberto Ceresole. You can check this guy in the internet. One of his initial advisors, well known from his militant anti-Semitism and for his radical denial of the Holocaust. These are some of the cases. This is Eligio Cedeño.
If you could conclude so we can.
Yes.
Thank you.
These are some of the cases we have in Venezuela, but they are not the government abuses, but oblivion and silence of the international community about these facts, the worst enemies we are facing in Venezuela right now, today. All of these grave acts of intolerance, all of these violations of human rights remain unpunished, will remain unpunished, if the free and democratic nations of the world, in exchange for cheap oil or easy profits, trade human dignity for silence. I respectfully urge you and all of the members of the international community to just listen to us. I urge you to confront these facts, to challenge them, if you will, and to really see what's truly happening in Venezuela. I ask you, respectfully ask you, to help us fight intolerance against the political dissident movements in Venezuela. I ask you to act against silence, against oblivion, against indifference. What is the purpose of the achievement of an international criminal justice system articulated to prevent the most grave damages conceivable to human rights if nation leaders won't respect it at will? Ask yourselves that question. Did you know, for example, that Hugo Chavez, 2 weeks ago, invited al-Bashir to Venezuela as a friend? Did you know, for example, that the politics of Venezuela, of the government of Venezuela, regarding the Inter-American Court of Human Rights is to systematically deny the results of the cases in which Venezuela has been convicted and declared responsible for violations of human rights? What will you do? What will be your choice? We have clearly decided to confront this abuse. We expect you to do the same thing. Thank you very much.